From WBRN Radio and on the Bostonred Network. Numbers Man here, this week in economics on the 14th of April 2019. One day before the U.S. tax day, that taxes are supposed to be mailed in at midnight, April 15th. Is the standard date, but however an automatic extension is granted till sometime in August. Consult your tax preparer or consult the IRS. They have FAQ on when to file your taxes. Basically what has happened today, all the tax software companies offer a free version, TurboTax, etc. And you can then they attempt, I should say, to upsell you to state returns and whatever else you want to buy. And thus, you don't have the need to go to a tax preparer. Now, that is basically for people that make under $60,000. It used to be at $50,000, but with the new deduction out there, and also the limited amount of deductibility that an individual can claim. Many things can't be claimed now that were claimed in the past. Now, we're not talking about people that are filing business returns. That is a little different ball game there, because deductions there are different, and depending obviously on the type of business one is engaged in. So those are some of the ins and outs, and also the form of the business, whether the business is an LLC or a corporation, etc., S-Corp. Won't go into all those sorts of things, but that is the tax day drill, as one would say. We had the past week, I don't know if I have it up here now, but a back and forth between Walmart, the world's supposed largest retailer, and Amazon. And basically, Bezos, the chair of Amazon, said that Walmart should raise their minimum to $16 an hour. Now, this is back to what we call the house that Bernie Sanders built. Bernie was talking about doubling the minimum in the U.S. It was at $7.50, still at $7.50, since the 90s. To $15 an hour. And when he ran his 2016 campaign, it was based upon $15 an hour. And basically the organizing activity was around the fast food sector and lower wage sectors, I should say, of the economy. Thus you have the Walmarts, the Targets, etc., these retail operations that are still standing. So what Walmart did was say, well, our average worker makes about $17.50 an hour. When you add in the benefits, that's an accounting trick right there. We're talking about actual compensation in dollars, not in terms of various benefits, vacations, sick days, any insurance that Walmart would have, which the workers would pay for there, and a lot of that's also how many hours they actually work, and that's very important. We'll get into that in a minute here. It's talking about quits, job openings, etc., from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. This is sort of a segue into that. But these discussions are being carried on from various actors on the scene, and when you have the larger ones, that are now talking about $15+ an hour, and in a tight labor market for those particular people. Now, part of the problem is, and old DJ Trump is going to the Midwest to talk about a tax cut. The problem with tax cuts is that if you cut taxes, then you also have to cut your budget. And as the former leader of the Senate used to say, the devil is in the details there. Trump has proposed various cuts to social programs, whereas boosting the percentage of his budget to the military. The problem that you have with the military is that you are dealing with a sector that doesn't basically generate anything. It could be argued, yes, they employ people, military contracts are let, but those contracts for various weapon systems are just that. They don't generate very much in terms of actual employment. That part of the military-industrial complex is fairly small. But now when you start talking about other industries, the Microsofts, the IBMs, that benefit from the military budget, then you're talking about more workers that are involved, but also dollars that are dead-end dollars, basically speaking. We used to be with jobs with peace, and when we were moving towards a peace dividend, that was when the former Soviet Union disappeared, the USSR, and that money spent fighting the Cold War, a Cold War that was no more. We demanded that that money be moved on to domestic priorities. And now we're seeing more and more of that case being made in actuality, in other words, in real time. In the industrial capitalist society, more and more emphasis is being placed on jobs, but jobs that are sustainable jobs and sustainable development. That is the biggest argument out there, and where climate change plays into it, global warming, etc. Now you have tornadic activity in the south, which is moving to the mid-Atlantic. A bit unusual. You have these storms. In fact, they're starting Augusta now. This is the final round of the Masters because of thunderstorms that are coming into Augusta, Georgia. And these kinds of things are forcing people to rethink many things in terms of wildfires in the summer and the fall on the West Coast, floods now in the Midwest, which is affecting crops that have been totally destroyed. And you have a long chain of events that are happening. Power outages in the Midwest. You don't only have power outages in Caracas and around Venezuela. You actually have them in the Midwest part of the U.S. You had some in Florida. So that's some of the events that are happening that are not anecdotal, but they're actually economic history being written. It's not the types of things that we usually do in macroeconomics. However, the Fed has now factored in some of these climate events, I should say, into their models, and so most of these other modelers out there, as in terms of how many dollars that these events cost, in terms of jobs, the destruction of infrastructure, replacement of that infrastructure there, direct aid. Puerto Rico is a good example. The aid bill has not gotten to Puerto Rico yet, and that's been almost a year now that the infrastructure of Puerto Rico was destroyed. And the same goes to parts of Texas, Louisiana, etc. So it is an important part of the scenario. So you'll hear in the political campaigns that some of the presidential candidates are talking about the number of years that are actually there, that substantial improvement has to be done. And that's called, from some, the Green New Deal. But the key word here is beyond Green New Deal, beyond Medicare for all, etc. is sustainable development. Of course, to have sustainable development, you have to have a national medical, a healthcare program. There's no doubt about that. And you also, at the same time, have to have an education program, and that is being talked about in various sectors, what qualifies as an education in terms of training. High school, now 12 grades primarily, should be cut to 10 or so. You used to have in the UK what they called the basic 8 grades, and then one went on to trade school or university. Well, you're going to see that more and more in the industrial capitalist nations, where the number of years that are spent in secondary education are going to be less. Then we look at college education. The idea of 4-year degree is going to disappear. It's going to be probably a 3-year degree. And then continuous recertification in various areas throughout one's working life, period. So this is changing. Different types of education. MIT has put their most of their courses online. Now, some of those courses may be 1 or 2 years old, but still they are relevant. And various other universities, I believe South Carolina has their IT course online. You can log in there and listen to the lectures, do the exercise, etc. Same with a master's program. Now, if you want to get a certificate, a diploma, etc., then you'll have to pay the fees and go through admission process. But that is how education is changing. Bernie has talked about this, and some other people dealing with just education is filtering into the campaigns, getting into more specific details about what constitutes an education and our training in the 2019 now and onward. Definitely skills have to be there, so we have to look at such things as, say, job retraining. That has different types of outcomes, and we look at that, is the training sustainable? In other words, we're not training people to stand at highway construction shops, sites, and be flaggers. You need flaggers, but we can turn that to robotic situations. That is not something to be training a person to do. So that whole thing is starting to get looked at in a more critical eye. And back to the employment part, some of the major banks are saying that they will pay their tellers and people on the lower end of the bank at least somewhere between $16 and $20 per hour. So the situation is that with low unemployment, and part of this is due to demographics. As the baby boomers, a large percentage retire, and they are retiring. I'm one, not retired, but the whole point is they pull out of the economy or go to work part-time, etc. There would be less of those people to take the positions that are now there. So this leaves the business to either fill those positions with people that immigrate into the country, or train the people that are in the country, or abandon some of the jobs. A lot of the jobs are changing. In other words, your jobs changing from job B to job E to job G in terms of the title. Some of the actual job descriptions itself are changing. There are some of the older industries still around. We see that in retail. That retail, brick and mortar retail, is vanishing. And then you have the smaller shops, so they come and they go. Booksellers, for instance, you had Barnes and Noble, and some of the larger booksellers have either went into bankruptcy or into retreat. And Amazon, remember, started out as a bookseller in Seattle. They went from books to various other things to being a bizarre of situations. Let's now go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and this is job openings. Was released on the 9th of April, job openings and labor turnovers. This is for February. The number of job openings fell to 7.1 million on the last business day of February. Over the month, hires and separations were little changed at 5.7 million and 5.6 million respectively. Within the separations, the quit rate, this is something that economists look at, was unchanged at 2.3%, and the layoff and discharge rate was little changed at 1.2%. The release included estimates for the number and rate of job openings, hires, and separations from, and they still use this, we've talked about this before, old-time non-farm sector by industry and for geographical areas. Job openings, we gave those. The job opening rate was at 4.5%. The number of job openings fell for total private, negative 563,000, and was little change for government. Openings decreased in a number of industries, with the largest decreases being in accommodation and food services at a negative 103,000. Real estate, rental and leasing at a negative 72,000. Transportation, warehousing, and utilities at negative 66,000. The number of job openings fell in the Northeast, the South, and the Midwest. Hires were little changed at 5.7 million in February. The rate was at 3.8%. The hires level was little changed for the private sector, and fell for government a negative 40,000. The number of hires decreased in the construction at 73,000, non-durable goods and manufacturing at 33,000, state and local governments at 22,000. The number of hires is little changed in the four regions. Total separations included quits, layoffs, and discharges, and others. The total separation referred to as turnovers. Quits are generally voluntary separations initiated by the worker. Therefore, the quits rate can serve as a measure of workers' willingness or ability to leave the job. Very important. Layoffs and discharges are voluntary separations initiated by the employer. Other separations include separations due to retirement, death, disability, transfer to other locations, same firm. You see that in the automotive sector. The number of total separations was little changed at 5.6 million in February. The total number of total separation rate 3.7. The number of separations little change for private and for government. Increase in education services 30,000, but a decrease in non-durable goods manufacturing at 32,000. Real estate, we've given that before, was a negative 26,000. The total number of separations little change for the four regions. The number of quits was little change at 3.5. The quit rate at 2.3%. The quits level was little change for private and government. Quits increased in education services, 23,000, but decreased in real estate and rental and leasing at a negative 15,000. Number of quits was little changed in the four regions. Layoffs and discharges was little change. That was at 1.7 million. Layoffs and discharge rate was at 1.2%. The layoffs and discharge rate was little change there. The layoff and discharge rate decreased in the federal government at a negative of 4,000. A number of layoffs and discharges little change in four regions. The number of other separations little change in February. The only separation level, was little change for total. That's for private. Edged up for government at plus 9,000. Other separation increased in federal government at 5,000, but decreased in construction at 13,000. Net change in employment. Large numbers of hires and separations occurred each month throughout the business cycle. Net employment changes result from the relationship between hires and separations within the number of hires. When the number of hires exceed the number of separations, employment arises, even if the hires level is steady or declining. Controversial. when the number of hires is less than the number of separations in employment declines, even if the higher level is steady or rising. Over 12 months ending in February, the total hires total was 69.3 million, and separations total was 66.9 million, yielding a net employment gain of 2.7 million. Include workers who may have been hired separated more than once during the year. The next report will be for March. Will be on May the 7th. And let me just make sure of it. We'll append this so we won't have to go through all of this. But they list a number of activities here. And I think it's by the thousand. It usually is. Yeah, in the thousand. And we look at some of the rates here. February 2018 and February 2019 was 4.2. That was in 18, and it's 3.7 today. This is the total for private is 4%, construction of 4.2, and 5.9 for manufacturing. Durable goods, less activity there, 2.7, 2.4. It was 3.3 in manufacturing and 3.3 in durable goods, 3.4. This was in 2018. Retail was at 5 in 2018. It's 4.6 now. That is their rate. And we'll look at education. It was 4.8 in education and health services, and now it's at 3 points. So you can see declines moving along here. This is opening hires, total separations by industries in a government in February 2018. It was 2.6. Now it is 1.6. The federal government 1.3. State and local governments 1.7. State and local education at 1.6. Excluding education at 1.8. So these are the technicals. We'll append this. Never fear. Consumer Price Index. This is for March of 2019. It was released on the 10th of April from the Bureau of Statistics. The Consumer Price Index for urban consumers increased at 0.4 in March on a seasonally adjusted basis after rising 0.2 in February. The Bureau of Statistics reported over the 12 months all items indexed increased at 1.9. That is under the 2% of the Fed. The Energy Index, which you watch very closely, in March was at 3.5%, accounting for about 60% of the seasonally adjusted all items monthly increase. Gasoline increased sharply, and electricity index also rose, and the natural gas declined. Index for all items less food and energy increased at 0.1 in March, increase as in February. The increase for shelter, healthcare, new vehicles, recreation, and tobacco were amongst those that increased in March, while the index for apparel has been not moving very quickly. Used cars, trucks, airline fares all decreased. The items in the index increased at all items at 1.9 for the 12 months. That's a 10th under there. And the index for all items less food and energy rose 2% over the last 12 months. The food index rose 2.1%. We'll put this one on also, and they break down the categories, the percentage changes in CPU. This is for urban consumers. On the average, a negative 1/10. That was in September 2008. Now it's at 1.9% in March of 2019. This is for the 12-month average. It was at 0.4%. That was 1/10%. Sorry about that one. Anyway, just a little bit showing in September. We're actually going back to September 2018. Was a negative 0.7. This is energy services. and now we had a negative 0.1%. Electricity at 0.3%. It was a negative 7 in September 2018. Just to give you a little bit of an example, healthcare commodities was a negative 0.2%. That would have been in September 2018. And today, it would be a 0.4%. And a negative 0.6%, I believe. This is adjusted for 12-month period. The food index rose 0.3% in March, following a 0.4% increase in February. So things are going up there. The index for food at home rose 0.4% in March, the same in the prior month. The index for fruits and vegetables rose at 1.6%, with the index for fresh vegetables increasing at 2%. The index for fresh fruit rising at 1.2%. Dairy and related products at 0.6%. Cereals and baked goods rose 0.3%. The index for other foods at home at 0.1%. The index for meats, poultry, eggs, and the only major food store group index to decline in March, falling at 0.2% after rising 0.2% in February. A roller coaster. The index for non-alcoholic beverages unchanged in March. The index for food away from home, in other words, called eating out, at 0.2% in March after increasing 0.4% in February. A little slow down there. The index for limited service meals, 0.2% index for full service meals at 0.1%. Food at home index rose 1.4% over the last 12 months. The index for food away from home rose 3% over the past 12 months, with the index for limited service increasing, and I guess they're talking about the McDonald's of the world, at 3.1%. Energy, the big one here, was up 3.5% in March. The gasoline index rose 6.5% in March after increasing 1.5% in February. And there's no sign that it's abating. It's going actually up. Healthcare index declined in in February. And it rose 0.3% in March. The index for prescription drugs increased 0.6% in March, following a 1% decline in February. The index for hospital services also increased in March, rising 0.3%, but the index for physician services declined at 0.4%. New vehicles increased 0.4% in March, as declining in February. The index for tobacco increased at 1.6% there. Thus, the consumer price index for urban consumers increased at 1.9% over 12 months. Consumer price index for urban wage earners and clerical workers increased at 1.8% over 12 months to an index level of 274.768. For the month, the index increased at 0.6% to season adjustment. The chained consumer price index increased at 1.7% over the last 12 months. For the month, the index increased at 0.6, not seasonally adjusted, and more revisions are out there. The past 12 to 6 months are subject to revision. The April figures will be out on May the 10th there. So let's go back and finish up a little bit of this. We talked about petrol actually going up, and we'll do this when we do the numbers, but nonetheless, Brent crude futures rose at 72 cents. It's at $71.55 here. Both of the benchmarks, the week gained about 1% there, with Brent's third consecutive week of gains and sixth straight rise there in the Texas Intermediate. In Libya, the National Oil Corporation, the oil corporation there, warned that renewed fighting could wipe out crude production in the country. So there's several countries offline. Venezuela is pretty much offline. Iraq is going offline. Thus, there are all kinds of problems going on. U.S. energy companies this week increased the number of rigs operating for the second week in a row, bringing the total at 833. This is from our friends at Baker Hughes, a part of GM, of General Electric, GE, not GM. On the demand side, the Chinese data shows exports rebound last month, driving U.S. and Eurozone bond yields to a 3-week high and helping offset weak imports there. While the macro fears of an economic hard landing may be overblown, the concentration of risk of global oil demand remains underappreciated, no doubt. While money managers raise their net long U.S. crude futures and options position in the week to April the 9th. So this is some information from Reuters. We had to look at it. Evidently, Anadarko Petroleum is on the block. Occidental has submitted a bid for $70 a barrel. Chevron, per share, and Chevron is offering a 65, a split between 75 and the rest in cash. We already talked about Bezos and his Twitter war. Walmart responds to it. Bezos say going to $16 an hour. Well, this is because of the campaign for 15. The Amazon's third-party sales rose in 2018, accounting for 58. This is also from Reuters, of total sales, up from 56 in 2017. Amazon said that it pays all required taxes in every country where it operates, including $2.6 billion in corporate taxes, and reported $3.4 tax expense over the last 3 years. Corporate tax is based on profits, not revenues. Our profits remain modest, given retail is a highly competitive, low-margin business. That's what they had to say. The European drug maker Bayer is having problems with their Monsanto division that they bought. Was not very smart on their part. And basically speaking, Bayer has seen 30 billion euros, that is $34 billion wiped off of its market value since August. They were found liable for Monsanto, that was for Roundup, for $63 billion last year, and is warned of the weed killer causes cancer. No doubt it has been found a long time ago, but that has happened. The Environmental Protection Agency, European agency here, let's see, we get to where they are, and other regulators across the globe have found glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup, is not likely carcinogenic. That's a lie. The World Health Organization's cancer arm in 2015 reached a different conclusion because it's not bought off. This is the Reuters story here on the Consumer Price Index. For the most part, inflation remains tame. That is Joe Naroff, a chief economist at Naroff Economic Advisors in Holland, Pennsylvania. The Fed effectively went on vacation and is likely to stay there for quite a few months. Over the past 12, we already talked about this, so we'll skip this. Low inflation expectation. We talked about the 2% that comes from the Federal Reserve. The dollar was trading slightly lower against a basket of currencies, while treasury prices rose. Inflation has remained muted. The minutes of the March meeting, this is a Fed meeting, showed some Fed officers believe the benign price pressure could result a result of lower inflation expectation. Also indicates that the labor market was likely not as tight as implied by measure of resource allocation. The minutes reinforce our view that the rates are on hold for a foreseeable future. This could shift if the economy or inflation surprises us in an up or down situation there. The 3.5% jump in energy prices accounted for 60% of the CPI last month. Gasoline prices surged by 6.5%. And some of this is just reinforcing what has happened. And this creates a problem. There's no doubt about that. Because you do have inflation out there, in spite of what is said by various analysts, pundits, and the Trump administration. And this is the reason that you raise rates, and you have to guard against that, because with the Libyan oil sector being out of the game, basically speaking, sanctions on Venezuela, and then you have Iran, heavy sanctions on them, so they're out of the sector. And it all depends on what the Saudis do. The Saudis have been holding off. So in other words, you don't have a natural market there. What you have is a contrived market that prices are held back by a supplier that has reduced their output. Now, does this last? No. Now, if there's a speed up, in other words, if there's an increase in, say, China, in terms of demand, some of the companies are going to have to start to pump more petrol. The shale oil people are going to have to produce more, and that is from the Baker Hughes people. The rig count is up, so they are pumping more. But now, will the Saudis stand by and let the people in the U.S. pump more petrol at their expense? Because all of these producers understand that fossil fuels, the demand for them, will decrease in coming years, in 5 to 10 years, as cars more electrical, solar kicks in. Solar panels are being sold in on the West Coast like hotcakes coming across Boston, in the heart of Boston. Anyway, this is part of the situation that they are looking at more and more. Let me just check our time and we'll do the numbers here. A shorter presentation than normal, but nonetheless, we do have some. We don't have as many. We'll have some more PCIs, no doubt, next week. We'll come back to this one. Harry and Meghan's child to pay U.S. tax. That's a very strange one there. This is from the BBC. A big headline here is Uber really worth $100 billion? The answer is no. In the UK, the Brexit deal has been delayed. And the question they asked here, this is on the 11th of April. Madame Lagarde, says further Brexit delay will hinder UK growth. She's a former French finance minister. She was speaking at the World Bank and IMF's spring meeting. Ms. Lagarde said there is a prolonged uncertainty, as we can suspect that the impact on confidence would continue because you know whether you are talking about investors, etc. Lagarde also expressed sympathy with the plight of UK businesses. Sorry about that. Earlier this week, the IMF warned that no deal could cause the UK economy shrink, echoing the scenario published by the government and the Bank of England. So journalists that having my positive hat on removes the risk of a no deal on April the 12th. Brexit is among the risks that the IMF has targeted. No doubt about that, and this was on the 11th. This article came out here. So this is one of the problems that the British economy suffers. We'll do the numbers now. What else do we have? Anything else to do? We'll start in Europe. The FTSE 100 at 0.26. And on to Amsterdam. They are down a negative 0.04%. And in France, 0.31% there. The DAX, that's in Germany, at 0.64%. Strass, the Eurostrass, at 3.9, and in Madrid they're at 0.24. On to Asia, Bombay 0.14% there, and Hang Seng in Hong Kong at 0.24%, and the Nikkei at 0.37. And back to the old U.S., where are we? The Dow was up at 1.03% there, and the Nasdaq at 0.46%, and the S&P 500 at 0.66%. That's in Chicago. And what else do we have lying around here? I think we gave the Brent crude future. Anyway, it's up at 1.02%, or $71.55. The change was 72 cents. West Texas crude up 0.49%. Change there was 31 cents at $63.89. Gold fell 0.65% at $1,296.15. The change there was $8.50. That's the Forex. Excuse me. So we have that, and natural gas actually was down 0.15%. So we have our commodities under our proverbial belt here. We'll take a quick look over at CNBC as we wind down our report. See if they have any words of wisdom here that perhaps we had not gotten. So here, Uber is way more complicated than Lyft, and investors shouldn't value them the same. Well, no doubt about that. J.P. Morgan, the mega bank, is bigger than ever, and Jamie Dimon is bullish on the economy. One of the big headlines here. And let's see. Paul Klingman on the next recession is one of the headline topics here. We won't go into it because our recorder is down. Not a good excuse. Let's just sign off here with Jamie Dimon. Says the U.S. economy expansion, it could go on for years. That the expansion after the Depression. It usually does. If you look back to the Great Depression in the 30s, it could go on for years. He added, there's no law that says it has to stop. We do make a list and look at the other things, geopolitical issues, lower liquidity. There may be a confusion of events that somehow cause a recession, a confluence. It may not be in 2019, 2020, 2021. Fears that a recession is on the horizon sparked last month when bond prices, we talked about that, signal that economic confidence is dimming. The further you look out, a segment of the yield curve is inverted, meaning that short-term debt yield more than a large term. And investors actually always invest in long-term bonds because that is where, quote-unquote, the action is. If a recession did happen in short term, the most likely cause would be a breakdown in trade negotiations between China and the U.S. It's not necessarily going to happen, a breakdown, but new things come every day. And this is one of the problems when you have a lot of instability out there. The game of recession, predicting is fool's play. He said some confusions of events at some point in the future will cause a recession, no doubt about that. And that's if you knew what they were, and you would be unbelievably rich. I don't know what those are, and nobody knows what those are, and nobody has ever known what those are. That's what he told reporters here. And so in other words, I guess you could say, I'm not sure what you could say. When you get to something of that nature, nobody knows what they are. Well, that is not factually correct. We do know what they are, at least in terms of historical and in terms of where things are now. That's not something. Okay. Make sure we pronounce confluence properly there. And is the juncture of two rivers. Oh well. What happens here is that you have to, in doing your economic forecasting, I'm not talking about the data tables, but you have to look at a number of factors. And naturally, you look at the global position, where economy is, I should say, globally. And then you look at the risk factors. A lot of risk factors out, including Brexit in the UK, as far as industrial capitalist societies are concerned. What happens in Iran, in the Mideast, to a lesser extent, and what is happening in the U.S. in terms of where the economy is. One has to note on tax cuts, that's what we used to call pump priming in the old days. When you have a massive tax cut, or a tax cut, John F. Kennedy did that, but it was a different situation. He had seen an economy coming out of World War II where tax rates were very, very high. And on the I Like Ike, I think the top tax rate was around 80%. So totally different from today. But so he did a tax cut under Arthur Occam and various others. And Reagan did a tax cut, but Reagan's tax cut caused problems, caused budget deficits. We hadn't talked about deficits here. But yes, it did cause deficits, and that is something that you don't necessarily want to see unless there's a reason. Now, you can run deficits up, say, for instance, to pay for infrastructure, future development that will, future infrastructure, I should say, but an education that will enable a nation to do sustainable development. Now, those are different situations. So when you talk about such things as the Green New Deal, that is seen as sustainable development. So yes, you'd run a deficit for that, but when you're running a deficit just because you're giving a break to corporations when most of that so-called break of money that they saved was reinvested in their stock prices. So that in itself does not help out the economy. That's the big problem. There's no trickle down anymore. Hadn't heard anybody talk. What Arthur Laffer is, but anyway, Laffer. You haven't heard any talk of that trickling down economy. Does it create some jobs? In some instances, it does. And in some instances, in the manufacturing sector. But the manufacturing sector has always been a tenuous sector. Number of reasons there. They would say that they have positions that they can't fill because they can't find candidates. And also they are subject to supply and demand. You can manufacture all the widgets you want, but if no one is buying them, that's what's happened in the U.S. automobile sector, they have to cut back production. And those productions are being cut back. Also, they're transitioning to clean energy electrical cars from the combustion engine that they have now. And they're making this transition in a fairly rapid, and this is what happens in technology. It's Moore's law. The processes will speed up. Well, what happens with the cars, you get a few thousand of them, a few 100,000 I should say, out there, like tests on these characters. But as they move out, then they continue to grow. Because every 5, 10 years, 15 years, people trade in their cars. So if they have an affordable situation, particularly with petrol going up, natural gas, which is going to be the mecca of most electricity, that's the problem with the administration's coal program. Yes, there are people still burning coal in the world, but less and less every day. Even the Saudis have one of the largest solar and windmill operations in the world. So we're seeing more of that, and that's technological changes. And then we have algorithms and robotics, and we separate them out. They really aren't. But that is changing the landscape also. So when you look at all these factors together, when you're doing your analysis, you have to take those into account. And you have to put that data into your models. What has occurred today in terms of numbers of people out there, the quits report we just gave basically says that the market is not as tight for jobs as one would think, and that is absolutely correct. Those that are not in employment are in the margins, we'll get those figures later, that are working less than the old magic 40 hours a week. They're working a part-time, a temporary in the gig economy, but they have several jobs there, and this in itself is not sustainable to the human. It may be sustainable to a robot, but not to the human, because there's less time for leisure. Not only less time for leisure, it has health consequences over a time period. There's some thoughts to think there. This is Numbers Man in the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth on the 14th of April 2019. See you next week. And check out our other programs on WBRN radio. Numbers Man, that's our political program, and we have a lot of that to do these days, covering the various political candidates, covering the events in the UK with Brexit, and various other things out there. And also our international affairs program, BR on the World, the open source report, our technical program, which will be coming up soon. What has happened to us is a disproportionate amount of time has been spent on other things, particularly on the political side. All these presidential campaigns going around, the Justine DeMar case and the Damone case, Damone in the Midwest. That's a police murder case out there with Justine, and other things that are occurring in the body politic keep you out here and keep you moving along. But one thing we are becoming to understand is that some of these things have intersects, such as what's happening in Venezuela in terms of the boycotts, what we call economic violence. In Cuba, they're slated to be, I think, at about 1.2, 1.3 their GDP because of various things that have happened to them. No income from Brazil. They had doctors there. They got a share of the income there. About $300 million there of income. and also sanctions to prevent tankers from bringing them petroleum product from Venezuela. And so you have some energy problems, some food shortages. Those are macro problems in Cuba. But not only in Cuba, China has some problems. China, because it's a very large economy, is starting to pull out of some of their problems. But is it sustainable? No. So you're going to see the GDP of all of these countries be lower. Now, some of the smaller markets, exception, some of the emerging markets have been doing better, and we'll see where that goes. Good day.